Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us. We welcome you to this webinar, MDT Member Recruitment and Retention, Building Trust and Traction, which is being brought to you by the Elder Justice Initiative and the Office for Victims of Crime Training and Technical Assistance Center. Before we get started, I just want to make sure that everyone is connected. As with all technology, we may at some point experience a momentary lapse in the webinar session. In the event of that type of problem, please be patient, remain with us, and the webinar should resume shortly. If you are having a technical problem, please type a private chat message in the lower right to our technical specialist, Jason, in the chat box. If you cannot access the chat, you can also send Jason an email at jadams@ovcttac.org. If you have questions throughout the webinar, we invite you to use the chat feature for that. We will be taking time at the end to address any questions that you may have for our presenters. And also a note that today's session is being recorded. It will be made available on the OVCTTAC and the Elder Justice website following today's presentation. At this time, I'm going to turn things over to our host, Talitha Glynn-Shaver, who is the MDT Technical Advisor with the U.S. Department of Justice. Talitha, you're on.
Thank you so much, Lori. Just wanted to give you a little bit of background about the Elder Justice Initiative and the MDT TAC program. The mission of the Elder Justice Initiative is to support and coordinate the Department of Justice's enforcement and programmatic efforts to combat elder abuse, neglect, and financial fraud and scams that target older adults. And we do this in a variety of ways. We promote justice for older adults, helping older victims and their families, particularly in getting them connected to resources and appropriate referral sources, enhancing state and local efforts through training and resources, and supporting research to improve elder abuse policy and practice. If you haven't been over to the EJI website in a while, I encourage you to visit elderjustice.gov and check out our website. We have many resources for prosecutors, for law enforcement, for victim service providers, and also for multidisciplinary teams. And today we'll be focusing on multidisciplinary teams serving those who are either victims of or at risk for becoming abused. Before we jump into today's presentation, I thought we would start with a couple of polls. Jason, if we can pull in poll number 1. And if you have a chance just on your screen, if you could identify how familiar you are with elder abuse multidisciplinary teams. Oh, great. Well, it looks like the majority of our participants have been a member of an MDT, and right around 30% know a little bit about MDTs but have not been an active member. Well, that's really wonderful. That will help us tailor today's conversation to know a little bit about how familiar you are with this subject. And then our second poll, if you can tell us a little bit about your professional background so we know who is in the audience today. Oh, wonderful. So we've got some social workers and victim service providers and some administrators, some legal folks. If you responded other, do let us know in the chat box who you are. Some disability services folks, ombudsman, oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining today's presentation. We are very lucky today to have 3 representatives from the Denver Forensic Collaborative for At-Risk Adults. One of the things that I bump into as I do consultations with various types of elder abuse multidisciplinary teams around the country is that over and over again people bring up this issue of how do we recruit and really engage participants, get them invested in this idea of serving on an elder abuse MDT and keep them there. And I think that this Denver team has really done an extraordinary job of addressing this very thing. We're very lucky to have on the phone today Linda Loflin Pettit. She is the Manager of Government and Community Relations for the Denver City Attorney's Office in the Prosecution and Code Enforcement section. There she oversees the Domestic Violence Arraignment Advocate and Grant Program and the Elder Abuse Prevention Program, including the Denver Forensic Collaborative for At-Risk Adults, which she helped to create. She also launched a hoarding and cluttering task force, which impacts many older adults in Denver. Linda trains with the CAO's multidisciplinary statewide training team that addresses domestic violence, stalking, and sexual assault in later life, and trains nationally with the National Clearinghouse on Abuse in Later Life. Maro Casparian is the Director of Consumer Fraud, working within the At-Risk Adults Unit for the Denver District Attorney's Office. She is responsible for managing the Communities Against Senior Exploitation program, which provides support and information surrounding elder fraud, neglect, and exploitation prevention. Maro trains and speaks throughout Denver and nationally on topics including scams, caregiver neglect and exploitation, cybercrimes, healthcare fraud, identity theft, aging and ageism, the mandatory reporting law surrounding crimes against at-risk adults, as well as spotting signs of elder abuse and neglect. And she also co-manages the Denver Forensic Collaborative for At-Risk Adults to address and identify and provide outreach and a safety net to at-risk adult victims. Also on the line today, we have Sergeant Timothy Blair, who is the supervisor of the Denver Police Department's newly formed Special Victims Unit, which investigates allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation of the elderly and at-risk population in Denver, Colorado. The Special Victims Unit is the focal point for all incoming mandatory reports and is responsible for ensuring compliance with Colorado's mandatory reporting laws. Sergeant Blair has been with the Denver Police Department for over 23 years and has worked in investigations for the last 12 years. His past investigation experience includes assaults, bias-motivated crimes, financial crimes, and currently crimes against the elderly and at-risk. He participates in the Denver Forensic Collaborative for at-risk adults. So thank you all for being here today and chatting with us, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you so much. We are so excited to be presenting today. So as we get into this presentation, we thought we would begin by introducing you to a victim that we were able to help just as our forensic collaborative was getting started. The case is that of Jade. It's a woman that I have known, and this is Linda speaking, for about 20 years. And just to give you some background, she has lived a life of trauma. So she was abandoned by her birth mother at age 1 and was left to live with her pseudo-father's family. He actually raped her at 10, but she wasn't taken out of the home until she was 16. She then married the love of her life. He abused her. She then left him with her 2 very young children and spiraled into poverty. And then in her 30s, she lost custody of those children. She then met another love, and he also abused her. And because of his severe abuse, she sustained permanent back injury. And so she has been on incredibly strong painkillers ever since, which is a part of the story as we move forward. I met Jade when she was in her 50s. She was going to college, and she was an intern for me at the nonprofit I was working at. And we found out she was living in her garage. So we helped her get into HUD housing, and she has been in Section 8 or HUD housing ever since. And so if you can picture that type of setting, that's really where our story picks up. She is living alone with her 2 cats in HUD housing, and she's very lonely at this point, and she meets Lewis, who is hanging around this building. At this point, Jade is 68, and Lewis is 45, and he begins talking to her. Hey, Jade, how's it going? And every time she goes out to walk across the street to the grocery store, he talks to her, and he gives her attention. And she is just smitten with this man, and she invites him to move in. And when I'm talking to her about this, all she can repeat over and over is, isn't he beautiful? Did you see his blue eyes? Oh, he's just got the most beautiful blue eyes. I met him. I can't say I had the same opinion, but she was very, very excited by this relationship. But then, as she's telling me about him over the various phone calls, she let me know that he was beginning to invite his friends in, and not just one or two buddies at a time, but several. And they would spend the night, and she would sort of try to be separate from them, but they were disturbing her sleep, and it was not comfortable for her. At one point, she and Luis had sex. She did not describe it in a loving manner. It was very clearly hurtful to her, but again, she accepted it. But what upset her the most in the beginning was that her pain medications were missing, because she truly needed these for her back injury. At the point I went at Christmas to take her things and actually met him face to face, he had taken over the bedroom. This is a one-bedroom apartment with a bathroom, a closet, a little kitchenette, and a living room. She had to sleep in the living room on the couch the whole time, which again exacerbated her back pain. He also was stealing her benefits card, and at one point when she confronted him about it, he, as she put it, laid hands on her. He pushed her up against the wall. He never all-out punched her, but that alone for her had her absolutely beside herself. And then she realized that he and his friends were in a gang and they were dealing drugs. Now, say what you want about Jade. She has very strong opinions about drugs, and this for her was just the limit. But his final threat to her was that snitches end up in ditches. And so when she's calling me, and at one point she came to my building to talk with me directly, I of course wanted to call my friends in the police department. I wanted to call friends in the DA's office, and she was hysterical, saying, no, snitches end up in ditches. You don't understand. Snitches end up in ditches. I don't want you calling anyone.
This is Maro Casparian. So if you take Jade's example and extend it out to many victims just as Jade, the bottom line is, who can Jade call? Here she is refusing to talk to anyone but possibly friends. She's got a whole community that she could reach out to, law enforcement, the Aging Network family, prosecutors, APS, neighbors, but she's not going to do it. And the reason is one of the reasons, as you all can imagine if you put yourselves in her shoes, I have to retell my story each and every time. Each time I say the story, I will get re-traumatized. And this is what we believe can happen to so many victims. And that resistance of talking even to friends becomes more of an isolation factor for these victims. And as we know, isolation creates a breeding ground for more victimization.
But if you also think about Jade's history of abuse, there's a reason she's not going to reach out to some of these people that we have on this figure. They failed her when she was raped by her stepfather. The system failed her when her husband beat her senseless. And even though the second love of her life caused her permanent back damage, there was never any accountability for him. She doesn't believe in God anymore because of the abuse that she has suffered. So going to the faith community was never an option. So, and then Child Protective Services took her children away from her. So when I suggested calling Adult Protective Services, she wouldn't have any of that either. So again, it was don't call the police, don't tell the DA. She didn't want to tell her building management. Why? Because he wasn't supposed to be living in the apartment to begin with. But what she kept saying is, I want him out, don't call the police. So at this point, I'm feeling like I'm in a silo because all the people I would naturally reach out to, she was telling me were off limits. So I love this quote. I use not only all the brains I have, but all I can borrow. And fortunately, a couple of months before this happened, we had started the Denver Forensic Collaborative for At-Risk Adults. And so I took the situation to them.
So what we're talking about is a multidisciplinary approach to problem solving. And for the survey, it sounds like most of you that are with us today have either been involved in that or you're currently involved and you're looking for maybe some options. Obviously, we didn't invent a multidisciplinary approach, But what we can do is we can just try and tell you a little bit about what we've done and what seemed to have worked, and hopefully you can figure out how, we can all figure out how to get the right people to the table and then keep them there afterwards. So the Denver Forensic Collaborative for At-Risk Adults, number one is why we have it, is it's action-based. We don't discuss cases that have already been processed and we try and nitpick and see what could have been better. We actually look at cases that are still being worked, and we review them and we ask for people's input to get ideas on how we can solve the problem from many different disciplines. We take cases that have a victim that has an increase for continued mistreatment or the problem is not going to solve itself. Usually cases that need some sort of immediate action, or they could require a long-term turnaround to solve the problem. We always look for cases that just that is going to help by having multiple people, multiple different backgrounds look at the problem. Victims may already be connected with services, or maybe they're not connected currently. Also, these cases are sometimes open and current criminal investigations, and we'll bring the assigned investigator to the meetings where they can talk about we can talk about the details of the case and get assistance from outside the law enforcement aspect. So one of the important things that we find with what we do with the Denver Forensic Collaborative is that everyone that's there at the table, for the most part, can act as a decision-making body or authority to act. It doesn't really do a lot of good to have people at a meeting where all that they can say is, well, that's a great idea, but I have to go back and ask my boss. So we need to have people at the table that are able to at least make some decisions and say, yes, we can try that. Yes, I can have somebody at my office look at that. You have to get those right people to the table. We have a pretty large group, and we'll go into that as we're talking a little bit more. It's a rather large group from a lot of different backgrounds, but we open it up to anyone. Anyone in the group can bring a case forward, and maybe it has nothing to do with law enforcement, maybe it has nothing to do with human services, but they can bring the case forward and just get everyone to chime in about what's the best thing for the victim in this point. Everyone that comes to our meetings, they're all professionals, and participation is by invitation only. It's not an open forum where we just allow anyone to come in. Probably one of the most important things, in my mind at least, is that we sign a confidentiality agreement and we refresh that confidentiality agreement every meeting at the start of the meeting. We do this because we are talking about live cases with real people. We use real data and real details, and so that open language is what really seems to help. So everybody feels that they're not working on maybe something that's maybe part fiction. These are real cases with real details. Our meetings occur once a month, and we keep them on a pretty tight time schedule because we value everyone's time. We understand that for someone to take an hour and a half out of their day once a month to come in and discuss these cases, we keep them on schedule. And then the last item that's on this slide is training and agency information, which is something that we started just within the last year and has just been actually great. So instead of reviewing cases straight for an hour and a half during our meetings, we reserve the last 20 minutes or so of the meeting so a different agency can come forward and give training or just present about what their agency does and basically how they do it and what their rules for their agency are. We've had some great training. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the presentation, but that is just a great thing that's part of the meetings.
As Linda discussed and TJ also discussed, there's obviously different doors for each victim with different types of victimization. So to reiterate, one of the benefits of a collaborative or a multidisciplinary team is that you have subject matter experts within each of the circles that can victimize specialists with physical abuse. So we have physicians, emotional abuse and threats. We have the Mental Health Association there, housing exploitation, we have HUD, sexual abuse, we have nonprofit agencies specializing in domestic violence and sex abuse, etc. So each of us working with subject matter experts allows the rest of the team to understand the lingo, understand the idiosyncrasies of each specialized group. Certainly there are people who think they have a bit of information knowing some aspect of police lingo and what's allowed and not allowed, but with the benefit of Sergeant Blair, he can speak up and say, no, we're not allowed to just go in the door, even if we want to go rescue someone. So the benefit is that with greater expediency, we get up to speed and then really focus in on the victim's issues.
And I think the other piece driving this is that we know that victims of elder abuse often are not suffering just one type of abuse. And so it's often overlapping and co-occurring. And again, with multiple disciplines and professionals in the room, we can address each of those cases no matter what nuances they present with. So as we were trying to build this, we started by mapping what services we have in Denver. And I realize this slide is not super clear, but each of these different shapes represents different agencies in Denver itself. We didn't even go into the suburbs that a victim could access in trying to get out of an abusive situation. And we realized it got really kludgy really quickly. And if we're having trouble figuring out how all of these different agencies communicate or work together, how on earth are our victims supposed to figure it out? And so that was one of the driving forces behind this collaborative community response that we built. We just wanted to make it simpler and, as trite as it sounds, make it so that there was no wrong door for a victim to go in. Wherever someone entered the system, we as the professionals behind the scenes would try to make sure they got to the right service avenue.
I often think of the slide that Linda just showed as that spinning above a victim's head. With an MDT such as this, and I saw somebody's comments that how to get people to stick, the reality is with our MDT is that it's been proven to us time and time again that each time we staff a case that we are providing an ability to expedite and assist the victim, and all necessary people are right there in front of us, and we can make something happen right away. And if the correct person is not there, among the 30 or so of us, we can outreach to them quickly. There's cross-support. When we say increase the eyes and ears of agencies involved, we've had example after example of saying across the table, well, if you see her in clinic, will you try to do X, Y, Z? And that is a safety net that you can't be so gracious about and saying you can't buy that. You're going to get a lot of mileage about that. We're also all the time identifying patterns and tactics of abuse. And it's not just for the victim, but so we can inform all of our work consistently. And obviously, delivering services to victims sooner is great. That is an obvious one. And I'll talk about an example later where we were able to hear about a situation and get help to the victim within hours, or days, rather. And then we're sharing responsibility for identifying offenders. When a community is aware of a person, and cross-culturally, cross-community, cross-agencies aware of one person's issues, imagine how much we are minimizing the isolation of that victim. And that's what we're doing just by discussing a case.
So when they came to me and they said that they wanted me to participate not only in this meeting but to participate in this webinar, it was kind of a personal question. So this slide is really kind of my personal answers to this. Why attend? Why do I get involved, and why do I stay involved in this group? And so I've had to ask myself that. And really, that number one point is the face-to-face contacts for those professionals that are in that meeting once a month. I use that opportunity to make sure that I'm in contact. We all know that people and professionals in positions that you need to have contacts with, they do change. This meeting allows me to keep current on exactly who is who in which office, and I make sure that they have my business card, make sure that they have actually met me. So if I need them, if I need to rely on them and lean on them for some information or some help with an investigation, they know exactly who I am. I'm not cold calling them. The other part of it is so I can actually, and we've talked about this a little bit, is provide input on cases. So unfortunately, people have preconceived notions about what law enforcement does and doesn't do. And so a lot of times I can just clarify exactly what that is. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then, you know, I just to try and teach all my partners that are there in the room. The other thing is really to learn from my partners. There's so many misconceptions out about every different agency, be it in the medical field, the human services field, mental health field, and if I can learn a little bit and I can take it back and I can help my detectives by clearing up some misunderstandings, then everything helps the cases and everything is going to help the victims. The last thing that I have to stress on this point is the building of relationships. And I had the opportunity, one of the partners from this group that I'm now working on with probably 2 or 3 other projects now, I was having lunch with her the other day, and so I asked her the same questions. Why do you keep coming back to the Denver Forensic Collaborative? Because there's not all these cases affect you directly. And she replied with the exact same thing. It's those face-to-face contacts and building those relationships, so I know if I have a problem, I know exactly who I can go to. It's very, very valuable. So in general, for law enforcement, because I know that's kind of the purpose of this webinar, I know that it seems to be, and even from the poll at the beginning of the webinar, there were not a lot of law enforcement, if any, that logged in. And so the biggest question is, how do I get law enforcement and how do I get district attorneys to get buy-in for these meetings, attend these meetings, and continue to keep coming to the table? For one, I think it's very important to me that for law enforcement should be showing that they are dedicated to these victims, these at-risk victims. And whether we can do anything criminally on these cases or not, I still think that we should be explaining ourselves as to the limits of the law and to what it actually takes. It's also, as I've mentioned, it's a great way to learn exactly what your partners that are working on for these same victims, what they can do for a victim, and then again what they can't do. Every office has their limits and what they can do and what they can't do, and it's important that we all understand that. Probably one of the biggest things is that there's a lot of misconceptions about law enforcement. Unfortunately, people watch a lot of TV shows, and so they believe, well, why can't you just go do this? Why can't you just go in there and get them? Why can't you just, so we, especially during the early stages of these meetings, we went through a lot of that, where I'd hate to call it finger pointing, but I think it was just an opportunity for me to kind of teach people, this is what the law says, and these are our limitations, and that there's only certain things that we can do. There's a phrase that we use in the police department here quite a bit where we say, we cannot arrest our way out of everything. Every situation is not arrestable to where an arrest is going to fix this. But we have to keep that open mind that if we can't fix that through an arrest, that there has to be somebody that we can kind of hand this victim off to and say, we can't help them, but maybe you can put some things in place that is going to help them. And then, of course, the last thing is immediate help as needed. And we'll talk about a measure that we have in place for the cases that can't wait until the next meeting. So why are we staying there? Once again, I'm just re-stressing that it's the partnerships that are built in that meeting that we just have to keep going. maintaining those working relationships. Just to give you an idea, some of the relationships and the professional relationships that have been made and the partnerships that have been made in these meetings have expanded and went in different directions. As we were talking in Linda's bio, we've recently formed a group to address the hoarding situation here in Denver, just so we can keep a better eye on it and we can take a collaborative approach to the hoarding situations. So really our hoarding, we call it a hoarding task force here in Denver, that we are still in the infancy stages. It is literally a subset of this forensic collaborative. It's partners that we have that are working there, and we kind of broke off from the group and we said, how can we work to work on the hoarding situation? I work closely with our environmental inspectors. We communicate on a regular basis. If they find something in a home that they feel that law enforcement needs to know about, and then vice versa, we get them involved in a lot of cases that are just where environmental issues are a little out of our realm. Also, we get advice on civil and probate issues on a regular time. The medical professionals that are in this meeting, I mean, if you are doing a criminal investigation that involves an at-risk person, you are going to need to lean on a professional that either can help you with evaluations maybe of wounds. Pressure ulcers are a great way a subject matter that you're going to have a doctor, a wound care specialist that's going to be able to step in and can explain on a law enforcement level about what causes this and can explain how can we evaluate that for possible criminal charges. The same thing works with our intellectually developmentally delayed community. We lean heavily upon our partners in that realm to where we can gather information from them concerning the client's past history, what is their care plan, and get those specific details. These are all partners that are in this room once a month where I can meet them face to face, and I know that I can lean on them for these details whenever. We all kind of speak a different language when it comes to these things, but through time and getting to know each other, we've all learned that we can speak the same language if we just break down some of the acronyms. The last thing, again, the training, the ongoing training, I spoke about that briefly. We go into just a little bit of training session every meeting where people are able to talk about, and it's not just what we do. We've had training on POAs, the different types of POAs and how they're enforced and exactly the rules that are around there. We've had training on long-term care facilities and state reporting within long-term care facilities. We've had training sessions on bed bugs, which is, other than the fact that it'll make your skin crawl by the time you walk out, it is just is great training for everybody so they have awareness, because all of our different offices, we go into these homes and we meet with these people, and simple things like bed bugs are something that everybody needs to be on the same page about.
So I noticed some of the questions in the chat are regarding MDT teams or M teams. Here in Colorado, they're called AP teams, and Colorado also has a statute that requires APS to staff cases at least 4 times a year sometimes it's per county, sometimes it's per region. We were able to go to the state and get permission for our DFC to meet the AP team requirement. So if you have something like this and can show that you are staffing whatever that minimum number of cases per year is, and that you've got the multidisciplinary group around the table, you too might be able to get that to meet your state requirements. So that obviously is one reason why our APS group attends the meetings. They also, though, bring cases for input and for referrals. Sometimes they've tried everything they can think to try based upon their referral list, and then when they put it to the group, somebody will say, oh, but have you thought about XYZ agency over here? And they didn't even know it existed. So it's a great way for them to get input and better help their clients. When we are staffing a case from APS, the caseworkers themselves who are working on the cases are always invited to attend. We often have them come back again in future meetings to give updates to the group as necessary. We're also discussing best practices. an example is we recently had a couple, both in their 80s. The man was arrested for abusing her, physical assault. Just saying, what is best practice here? Sending him, who needs help with mobility, to a batter intervention program probably isn't the best, and she's certainly not going to go to shelter. She's told us that, and APS has been told to leave. So it was a way for the whole group to say, what do we think best practice in a case like this would be to get eyes on this couple, get them support, but make sure that neither of them gets hurt in the future. And then constantly we are, as TJ keeps hitting on the training piece, we are constantly having APS go over what their core values are, what their options are, whether or not they can get guardianship, why they might take a case, why they might not substantiate a case. And I think the two groups in the room who have had fingers pointed at them the most are the police and APS. And so it's just a constant re-education, at least annually, about why they may or may not be able to take cases, because when something goes wrong, those are the two groups that get blamed the most.
Would we have a critical case or something that needs to be put in place quickly, or if there's an emergency, we also use e-consultation. We clearly with email, we don't disclose the full name of the victim. We do hide certain identifiers in that. But in this way, sending out an e-consult provides an immediate problem solving. It's generally much more useful in that type of emergency situation. And then if we need to, we can take it to the next month's staffing to follow up. We can, with that e-consultation, be aware of anybody else we need to bring in for that particular case when we're staffing it. It actually goes to one of the questions that's on there, should everyone have a subset group? We are evolving subcommittees as needed, and not everyone from the parent forensic collaborative comes to the hoarding group. They're certainly welcome. People aren't raising their hands fast to join another long meeting, but in those type of environments, we may be able to reach out to other agencies that need to be brought in that don't need to come to the original case. For instance, the animal protection group comes to the hoarding meetings. They would be spending a lot of unnecessary time if they came to the monthly meetings. But e-consult is a great way, and because you've already developed relationships, trust, etc. Somebody's asking exactly what is DFC e-consultation. It is taking a case that needs immediate issue resolution and sending it out to the MDT only, creating confidentiality, and getting some quick answers for the victim to put into action.
And so that's what I did with Jade. I sent out an email. I took out her identifying information and sent it to our collaborative. Somebody asked what DFC stands for. It's our Denver Forensic Collaborative. And just said, what do I do with this? She won't let me call my friends over at the police department, and she won't let me go downstairs to the district attorney's office. What do we suggest? And so what happened is the DA investigator said, well, why don't I go talk to the building management in Colorado? We can get a protection order to keep him off the property. And that's what he did. And so they were able to keep Luis off the property that way. I called APS. She didn't tell me I couldn't report to them, and so they opened a case. A nonprofit advocate emailed in and said, well, I can reach out to her for some ongoing counseling and some peer support. And then another nonprofit said, why don't I help her get a temporary civil protection order just to keep him out of her apartment as well, just in case the property one didn't go through. And so we were able to get some success in that case simply from an email. And then as people needed identifying information, I would pick up the phone and call them to let them know that.
Again, just in terms of addressing the needs of the victim, our collaborative can do that and keep each other honest in addressing the victim with dignity and respect that they deserve, to put aside any preconceived notions of ageism, which certainly happens a lot in our world, and allows us part of the respect and dignity that we're doing with this consultation and with our meetings is we're not asking the victim to put themselves through the same thing over and over again. We're respecting what happens with re-traumatization. And so we're always mindful of that. We're always mindful of people can check us and say, remember cultural differences. We have people who are experts at different cultures, and they can bring that to the table and say, this is how we have to deal with this victim specifically. So just keep that in mind as you're going forward with helping at-risk adults. And folks with IDD and DD works the same way.
So in terms of the keys to collaboration, it might sound simple, but it's not always, as you probably know. The first thing we can advise is just start by inviting, and clearly it's always easier to invite the people you know. So it's easy to pick up the phone to TJ or tomorrow and say, hey, what do you guys think about joining this group and bringing your expertise? If you have people who come from the domestic violence or sex assault realm, have them invite their contacts. If you can, do try to get the law enforcement to the room. I cannot stress how valuable TJ is at each and every single meeting. It's just invaluable. Having prosecutors there, too, is very helpful because, again, people have watched all those TV shows, Law and Order and NCIC and everything, and to me those are just cartoons because, well, for obvious reasons. But people get a skewed idea of what can happen with the law and in a courtroom, and having a prosecutor there, maybe not to say how they're going to handle the specific case, but to say, oh, no, people. We have to follow constitutional law here, and here's what that means. It's just really helpful. We have elder service providers in the room. They were with us from the very beginning. We have both system-based advocates that we've invited as well as community-based advocates, which is helpful because all of us in the system are seen as being part of one and the same, but someone from a community agency can get in doors that we can't. We try to keep cultural resources in the room, like Maro stated. We even now have a state real estate investigator who occasionally brings cases herself. Again, the fraud is just rampant, and so having that resource is very helpful. As TJ mentioned, the healthcare professionals, they're just so extremely helpful. We have both a geriatrician and 2 nurses who are home health nurses who talk about what they can each do in their different systems, but then they're also educating us about what we're looking at in terms of a wound or in terms of the progression of a disease or of dementia. Mental health workers are also very, very invaluable, and they're constantly educating us every single meeting. As you probably know, people in the community like to say, oh, that one's just crazy, and that's really not a fair label to put on people, and they're constantly educating us on what that really means. Environmental health, as TJ said, can get in doors that we cannot, and often there is overlap. Financial exploitation, that's TJ's expertise, that overlaps with just about every case that we bring up. We have people in the room who are trauma specialists. We have researchers. DU is at the table, and it's because of them and a suggestion from Maro that we are now identifying housing exploitation as a form of abuse that we're seeing quite frequently. Our public administrators are there to be able to talk about real property, how to protect assets before someone has bled the person dry. We've got civil legal services in the room. We have tried to bring fire in at various times. EMS is another suggestion. The one thing you will find that is not on here are those who are in the work for the money. We found that was a line we can't cross, and we had to uninvite someone because when money changes hands, if things get a little bit hinky, shall we say.
Self-centered.
Yes.
Or, yeah.
So when we were building this, we took some key players to lunch or to coffee in advance and had to really hook their interest and show what's in it for them. I don't know about your communities, but here in Denver, we have some people in power who have some egos. And so we had to really work with those egos to help them understand why they really needed to be at the table and why we needed them more than anything. We also offered a training session for part of the meeting early on, and then we got away from it, and now we're back to it. But that way, whether somebody chimed in about a case or not, they still walk away with new information for themselves. So again, it's what's in it for them, and that's just a way to provide that extra value in the meeting.
So when you're talking about, these are just some of the tips that we've come up with, and this is, to me at least, this is one of the best things that we've come up with. You have to have a strong facilitator. Someone has to keep the meeting on track. It has to be on point. It's very easy when all of us in the room, we all have the same basically concerns about the future of our at-risk, our elderly community. And it's easy to get off track, and it can turn into a complaint-oriented discussion. But really, you have to have a moderator, a facilitator that's going to keep it on point, keep the conversations professional, relaxed, but still respectful. We have to limit the finger pointing. We all know that, and limit the eye rolls during the meeting sometimes too, as other people. If you have a major case, something that's in the news, that's from your community, from your state, and that's a great way to start the topic. Look, this just recently happened over here. I think we should maybe look at having a stronger multidisciplinary team that can address these situations before they happen. So we won't be the next ones that are in the paper. It's just a great way of getting the ball rolling. Another point that I think I stressed earlier was the new languages. There are so many different acronyms that are out there. Everyone has a different language. The moderator or the facilitator has to be the one that, even though if they understand the term, maybe say, hey, can you take a second and just explain what you're saying when you say this acronym or when you use this term, so everyone's on the same page. Knowledge is power in these meetings, and it helps with, it just helps open the meeting up quite a bit. The different rules for confidentiality is something that we're still struggling with sometimes. Every organization has different rules as far as what they can discuss, what they can follow up with after it's been assigned to their organization. So you have to understand that and be respectful of that. They may not be able to follow up. They may not be able to give you an explanation of exactly what is going on. It really kind of leads to our next point, which is trust. You have to have trust for the people that are in the room with you there. Linda mentioned already checking the egos at the door. Everybody has to do that. You have to accept that everybody that's in that room is there for the same reason, is how can we help the people that are in need. And it isn't always a law enforcement function. It isn't always a human services function. Sometimes it takes a non-governmental agency that's able to step in there. And that's why we just have to check your egos and trust that they can do that. Realistic goals, guidelines for what we're reviewing. If there's conflict between, at our most recent meeting, things got a little tense for a little while we were discussing a case because the caseworker got defensive, and I think the facilitator did a great job of just diffusing the situation and getting everybody to agree that regardless of the outcome of where the caseworker's work was going to go, that we were all on the same page, that we wanted to do what was best for the victim, for the elder that was involved in it. Celebrating accomplishments. Understand that you may not find out exactly what happened on each one of the cases that we discussed, but just knowing that with our action-based, we have an action plan that is decided on at each case. Just having an action plan, that really is an accomplishment, and that is something that we have to celebrate and go forward with.
I think this is just really a reiteration of all of that. We do encourage everyone to bring cases. So that's an important thing that we do, and not everybody does, but we actually, an interesting thing here is we actually keep track of who's speaking throughout, not who's presenting, but who's speaking, because it matters to us that everyone participates. We just did a survey, a blind survey to all of our participants, and one of the questions was, how freely do you feel that you're able to participate? And everybody, pretty much everybody said, if I had something to say, I say it. And that whole thing of leaving your ego at the door, sometimes you have to keep reminding yourself to leave your ego, because there is that thing of, but why can't we help this person? You know, but, or why can't you? So we really find that that's a real important ingredient with a key ingredient, is making sure everybody participates. And collaboration in general. What's the benefit? The bottom line, and you guys can read this slide, but the bottom line is we're increasing the victim's safety. We are making sure that victim doesn't have to recant and retell their story. And we've said that a number of times during this session. That really is the bottom line. And the shared ownership and the shared responsibility and the case outcome is a team win. It's a team win. It's no, I did this or you did this. You can't imagine the number of people that call at the end of a resolution and say, Denver Health did an amazing job helping me do this. APS did an amazing job. And with that, that's why people keep coming back, I will tell you, is that they feel that this is a team effort, really, truly. So, and then at the end of the day, you walk away and you've got a lot more shared knowledge, a lot more shared resource. You're learning a lot more language. You don't just go up to Sergeant Blair, which I did at the beginning all the time. How come you can't just open the door and go in and save the person? But we're always learning. We're always being informed. And we all come at and understand how we can contain the perpetrators in different ways.
So, as we've mentioned already, we don't come out of our silos once a month just for this meeting. We stay out of our working silos on a regular basis, on a daily basis. The partners, the professional partners that we have from these meetings are the professional partners that I lean on and work on a daily basis. We have a better understanding of each other's framework for approaching these cases. We understand each other's philosophies and the information sharing, even working through the confidentiality issues. We all understand that in the big picture, it's all about the victims in the end.
I'm going to give you two cases that, oops, I'm sorry, I just jumped you. Okay.
Well, no, that's just, once again, this is reiteration, just kind of stressing the point that with knowledge is power. We all understand each other's, and there has to be that trust issues between the different professionals, and that some of that language, the struggles that you had at the beginning, the start of the multidisciplinary team, a lot of the problems have gone away because they understand everyone understands each other's limitations, and we all understand each other's languages.
So I'm going to give you two quick cases. One shows you how a quick help, and one is more complex case. One situation was we had an Asian woman who was verbal but not willing to speak in a hospital. APS could not get her to engage with them at all. And within just a moment, and you'd think that our physician, our geriatrician, would be focused on just the health and well-being, just the general physical attributes, but she, our geriatrician, is from Japanese descent, and she was able to say, you know what, this victim is in the hospital, in my hospital, I'm going to go make some homemade kimchi and go up and chat with her. And indeed, just by doing that, and she would not have been able to learn about it, do it without the DFC, but just by making a little kimchi, really expedited the relationship that APS could have. And we really ended up, APS really worked and problem solved the issue. The next case is more complex. I got a call from a reporter who had a call from a neighbor, was concerned about their neighborhood house. The neighbor house, he could see a hole in the roof. He could see inside the house from the roof. He was concerned, and I'm speaking quickly just because we're short on time. But the house was, in the end, totally uninhabitable. This woman, and I'm leading to the end, was living without water and electricity for 5 years. It was a horrible, horrible hoarding case. And the woman was 80+ years old, would refuse anybody knocking on the door. APS had tried for quite a long time to get in. We brought that case immediately to DFC, and by the end of that DFC meeting, we had environmental health, we had the city attorney's office, Denver Police Department, the mental health group, all were coordinated. City attorney's office was able to issue a warrant. The mental health people, they all staged about a couple blocks away. And unfortunately, they had to intervene with this woman because it was a great danger to herself and to the neighborhood. But within that hour and a half, we were able to stage an intervention and bring resolution to this woman. She got immediate medical attention. She got immediate mental health attention. The house is boarded up and safe. The neighbors and the neighbor children are safe. When she went into the hospital, it was on the long weekend, holiday weekend, with the help of this DFC, and only because of the DFC were we able to, I was working with the social worker in the hospital saying, let's make sure she doesn't get discharged over the weekend, because she would have normally gotten discharged if she was healthy and she was showing competency in a certain way. She would have gotten discharged to the street. But because of DFC, and I'm not just saying because of the relationship, but the relationship that was developed by DFC, we were able to get her immediate help. She's now has her own housing. She has money. She is safe, and her house is boarded up. It was pretty miraculous and a huge group effort.
So does a multidisciplinary team fix everything? Is there a magic pill that's going to say, well, this is going to keep all it? Well, no, it's obviously not. But these are some things that have worked for us, and hopefully they'll work for you. And the whole idea is that we're all working for the same goal, is to find a better place or how to protect our elderly community. A lot of you already have people who already are participating. Reevaluate. Think about people who might be missing from the table right now, and how can you get them on there? How can you build on this? If you don't have a multidisciplinary team that's already there, when can you have a realistic start for the whole thing? And really, what's holding you back? Because there's nothing that you're going to benefit from this. Even if it's a small victory, there's going to be a benefit.
So in the couple of minutes we have left, are there questions that we can answer or left unanswered?
This is Talitha with the Elder Justice Initiative, and I think most of the questions that have been put forward in the chat have been addressed. If anybody has any other questions that they'd like to put forward, go ahead and type those in. While they are doing that, I want to thank the three of you, Linda, Maro, and Sergeant Blair, so much for your time today. I think the cases that you brought forward really illustrate what is possible through collaborations like this. And you said so many wonderful things, but I just want to reiterate what I see your teams from all over the country say, and that is when you work cases together, everything changes. You see the value of these collaborations because you see how it helps facilitate your case and how it benefits the client and the community largely. And you start seeing these better case outcomes, and you're right, that is when people start coming back and really valuing having a seat at that table. I know that there was a law enforcement officer on a team in California who was very resistant to participating in an MDT, was the most resistant person that I had ever worked with. And after working a few cases, he totally got bitten by the bug and loved working these cases, loved his collaborators, and when he retired, gave this speech saying that working with the elder abuse multidisciplinary team had been the highlight of his career because he grew so much professionally. So this very natural cross-training and relationship building happens from these collaborations. So thank you so much for all of the wonderful illustrations that you brought to this presentation today. I don't have any questions that have come in the chat. Do any of you have any final thoughts before we log off for the day?
Thank you very much. And we're all available so you can write back.
All right.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time, and have a great day, everyone.
All right, thank you to our presenters. If you have additional questions, you can email the Elder Justice Initiative at the email on your screen, elder.justice@usdoj.gov. And that concludes today's webinar.